Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
My new book, Diary of a Psychosis, is out. It's the most lively, devastating baseball bat to the throat takedown of what the public health establishment did in 2020 and beyond that you can imagine. It's my first book in 9 years, and you're going to love it. Check it out at diaryofcovid.com. And if you've already bought it, make sure also to visit diaryofcovid.com so you can claim your free bonuses, including my free companion volume, Collateral Damage, a collection of stories from real people who suffered under the restrictions. They weren't allowed to tell their stories at the time, but every one of them told me, "We just want to be heard." Check it all out at diaryofcovid.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Tom Woods Show, episode 2475, with our old friend Kathryn Huwig. I keep mentioning you on podcasts I go on because the thing you did at the Ohio legislature inspires me to this day with and I don't know if people consider this word a little crude, so parents, if you have children in the car with you, you may want to turn the volume down for just a few seconds, for the sheer badassery of it. Okay? I just love it. So I want to tell that story in a minute. But first of all, you became a trusted voice when it came to COVID data in Ohio. And in particular, you were concentrated on Facebook, but you're also out there on Twitter. And I know people will say, well, these are evil platforms. But the thing is, if I'm trying to get information out to a lot of people, I got to go where the people are, and even though I know sometimes these platforms can get in the way and make it difficult, I got to at least try. And so you've been doing that, but also now more recently, and something that we want to talk about a bit today, you are co-founder and executive director of Freedom Council, and that's COUNSEL. And we want to talk about exactly what that is because it's very, very important. But before I talk any longer, let me officially welcome you back to the Tom Woods Show.
Well, thank you for having me again.
I just for old time's sake, if you wouldn't mind, it's there's a comedian named Brian Regan. You ever heard him, Brian Regan?
No, please.
Okay. Well, he's one of his things that he's known for is that he's a clean comedian. You can take your kids, you don't have to worry about what he's going to say. But the other thing about him is at the end of his show, he will take requests. Now, I can understand why a musician would take requests, but he'll ask people, are there any particular bits of mine that you'd like to hear me do? And he doesn't understand it. It says, it makes no sense to me why you people want to hear something you've already heard before. Well, in the same way, I would like to have you be Brian Regan in this case and recount for me a story I've already heard from you, but that I just love so dearly. And that is that story of you in the Ohio legislature. First of all, I'd like to know, number one, how you got that opportunity. I mean, were you invited by a state representative, or how did you get there? And then once you got there, just tell us that story about what you did.
Well, so, I wasn't invited for it. I had been relatively prominent in Ohio, breaking down the data. We had a podcast that was pretty popular here. And I had my Facebook group, which was over 10,000 members. And, a pretty big following. And I'd been doing data analyses for a good long while. And that particular testimony was actually the second testimony I did. The first testimony I did was 2 weeks prior. And it was for one bill. I mean, it was sister bills going through the Senate, and one originated Senate, one originated in the House. And they did it concurrently, so it sped up the process. And so the first time I went in and I just simply broke down the numbers and described how the deaths that Ohio was reporting, the 75% of them at the time didn't make sense as logical sense as being from an acute respiratory virus. 1 week after I made that testimony, no questions, nobody said anything to me. The Ohio Department of Health disassociated the death data from the onset data and the hospital admissions data. So I could no longer do the analysis that I did. And so actually the part that you saw was kind of a throwaway part. I actually had a first part to that testimony where I talked about you guys are fixing the problem by erasing the problem. That is a problem. But the part that went viral from that testimony was just a very simple graph. It's pretty classic for me. I mean, this is kind of how I look at things. go down to the simplest way to ask people, hey, you guys have been saying we're stupid this whole time. You're experts and we don't know what we're doing. So, okay, I'll take you at your word. You know better than I do. So I took a graph of the ICU bed occupancy in the state of Ohio over the course of the pandemic from the beginning. And this was to that time, which was March of 21. And I removed the x-axis. Which was what showed the time. And so you could see this, classic epidemiological curve where it goes up and it goes down. That's what epidemics do. That's what it's been doing for all time. And, all this time, I think actually it had come out of a recent press conference of Governor DeWine where I just watched him and I got so mad. And I just said, this is stupid. I mean, this is so obviously wrong. And so I asked, hey, this is the graph. And if all of these things that you say are so important, then you should be able to recognize it. You should be able to point out on this graph. And since you're so much smarter than me, I'm going to, ask you for your help with it. And of course, you can't see anything on that graph because nothing that we did anything at all. And, one of the other things that I do with that is a lot of what I did online. As you said, Facebook is problematic and stuff, but it's also where you reach normal lay people. And it's not just about, experts going out there saying the obvious, but it's also about normal lay people stepping up and doing something. And so what I did there was also meant to be an example that anybody, doesn't matter what your education is, it doesn't matter where you were in the country, it doesn't matter who you're talking to, anybody in the country, any education level could do that same thing and kick them in their teeth. So that's that story.
That's tremendous. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. So let's bring people up to date with what's been going on since we talked last time. What is going on between you and the Supreme Court of Ohio? What is the nature of your case?
All right. So I am actually suing the Ohio Department of Health now. I have actually made a public records request about a year ago for the mortality data, for the shot data, the COVID shot data, because of course we know that data is corrupt and the data that they put up is corrupt, and everybody all over the country has been trying to get that information from their respective health departments, and everybody's fighting. So I made a public records request, and of course the Ohio Department of Health doesn't want me to have anything to do with that data because they know what I'm going to find. And so what it is a writ of mandamus. It is basically us going straight to the Supreme Court of Ohio saying the Ohio Department of Health is not doing its job under the Ohio Sunshine Laws, the public records request laws. And we are asking the court to tell them to do it.
So when did this start? Like, when was your request?
My request was, I believe, I want to say February and March of 2023 is when I made the formal request.
Okay. And it was on what grounds was it declined?
Oh, well, okay. So they gave me a number of reasons that were pretty funny. First of all, they're incompetent. Was one of the reasons that they put out in their last response, meaning that they don't know how to program a database to output data. And they also claimed that
But what data are you asking for?
The mortality.
So why is that complicated? What's complicated about that?
Nothing. Actually, what's even funnier is I do have the mortality data for 2020. That was actually given to the Columbus Dispatch, which is a very liberal newspaper in Columbus.
So they knew how to do it at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But they have decided they are not required to do what they've already done again. And they have refused to give any of that mortality data after January 28th of 2021.
And the mortality data that you're seeking, runs from what period to what period?
Well, whatever I can get. I already have 2020. I believe I originally requested between 2018 and present day.
Okay.
They fought me saying it was overbroad. And so I narrowed it down to just 1 year.
Okay.
They said that they are incompetent and they cannot redact personally identifying information.
Okay, and what else?
And that by trying to print it out, that was creating a new record. and they are not required to create a new record for me.
Okay. And you believe that these are BS responses, and that
Yes.
you're not making an unreasonable. I mean, you would think historians would want this data. There's surely somebody is curious. Well, let me ask you though, what do you think you might find in the mortality data? Like, what would a curious Kathryn Huwig, who's been going through numbers for several years now, why would she want this data? What is it? What might it illustrate?
A lot of things, a whole lot of things. Obviously, there's actually an individual out in Massachusetts right now who does have the entire mortality database for the state of Massachusetts, John Bodwin, and he's found some really terrifying numbers coming out of post-injection era.
I see. Okay.
Part of it.
I see.
And
That's part of it.
And then also the question of what did people actually die from? I walked up there originally in my testimony saying that, hey, these deaths don't make sense as being from an acute respiratory virus. What was it that they actually did have? And just to compare that. And actually in my last response to ODH, just a couple of weeks ago now, I in my affidavit, this is all available online too on the Supreme Court docket. I actually pointed out one of the things that happened that is a consequence of them hiding the data, specifically when it came to the shots. In Ohio, Governor DeWine, he was the first of the governors to start one of those big money programs, the Vax-A-Million they had, where if you got vaccinated, you could enter in and you could win $1 million. And he made lots of hay on this. He came out, he talked about it increased vaccination rates by 45%. He was on national news. He was on international news. Other states followed his lead and said, oh, this is wonderful. This is great. Well, at the time, when you would go onto the website, you would not be able to know what age groups of people were getting the shot at the time. And this happened 2 days. He announced this 2 days after the 12 to 15-year-olds were allowed to get the shot. And so that already is pretty suspicious right there. So you got a whole group of people who have got pent up desire for it. And then 2 days later, you announce this initiative. On the website, they just showed what the cumulative number of people in each age group was. So if you went there at any given time, all you would see is the cumulative number. And, 0 to 19-year-olds, 20 to 29-year-olds, et cetera, et cetera. So you wouldn't really have an idea of how things changed over time. But because I had my group and I actually had a couple dozen volunteers who had been collecting all this extra data off of the website, scraping it by hand. So going to the website, mousing over, writing down the numbers and the works. They had been collecting data for about 6 weeks by the time the Vax-A-Million program was announced. And because of that data scraping, we can see unequivocally that the majority, if not all, of the increase in injection uptake was in the youngest age group, 0 to 19-year-old. So he was out there and they had this data. The state of Ohio, ODH, has this data. They knew it was the kids, but they wouldn't share that. And they've actually kept it hidden. They won't let anybody know that. And they got political bonuses up from it because he was running for re-election that year too. So that's just one of the things that they did. And then, of course, we have all of the very likely fraud in terms of the money that was given to hospitals and the works for COVID deaths and all that.
Hey, everybody, a quick message from your old friend Woods. Back in the Ron Paul days, I did a lot of public speaking. And people would come up to me and say, boy, that was a great speech, or I really enjoy reading your books, and I've absorbed all the information, but now what do I do? I have the information. I don't need any more books. What do I do? That's a great question. And there are a lot of macro things we can all be working on together to help create the kind of society we want. But there are also a lot of micro things we should be working on for ourselves and our families to get us through this bizarre period of history in which all the institutions of American society, and frankly, of the regimes of the world, are arrayed against us in some kind of creepy, weird war. How do you navigate a world like that? So I've built up an outstanding community of smart, ambitious people called the Tom Woods School of Life. And we do two main things. First, we learn. Like, what do you do with your money when the regime is destroying its value? Or how do you keep your kids from having their minds colonized by strange ideologies? Or how do you build your own business so you don't have to take orders from the man? Or how do you homeschool your kids even when you're convinced you can't? How to win even in a blue state. We talk about how one of our members stopped one local tax increase after another. How did he do it? Also, I teach things like how to write well, how to express yourself effectively, how to speak well. In other words, how to make yourself unbreakable. Second, we meet in small groups online. We keep each other accountable and motivated. We give advice, we make connections, we generate ideas for each other. We have groups for entrepreneurs who become better and better entrepreneurs. We have a content creation group, a copywriting group, a women's group, a fitness group, a parenting group, because in this crazy world, sometimes it's a challenge being a parent. Does your kid always have to be the oddball in every situation? So we talk about and work on things like that. You name it, we're doing it. It's the Tom Woods School of Life, and I want to see you inside. The website, tomschooloflife.com. Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, when the final truth is told, that this thing is a mess from start to finish. And
Yep.
no aspect of the story will turn out to have been right. You know, like no aspect that was shoved down our throats, I think, will turn out to have been right. Do you have any concern that if they were forced to hand over this data to you, that they might just falsify it?
Well, if they tried, I'd be able to figure that out. I mean, I have ways. I have all the data that I was collecting at that time, and so I can definitely.
Okay.
I can go to the local health departments too. I mean, it would have to be done on such a massive scale that they wouldn't be able to.
Well, I'm just wondering. I mean, at this point, any naivete I once had is long gone. So automatically I go to the worst case kind of scenario. I want to talk about, if we may, for a minute here, the what you're up to lately in regard to Freedom Council. So can you talk to us about exactly what that is? Because it definitely sounds like something worthwhile. And I have a feeling that after this episode, you might be hearing from more people who'd like to help.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. So this actually comes out, it starts at the same point that our introduction also started. You were not the only person who saw that little viral clip of mine. There was actually an attorney not far from me, just about a half an hour away in Akron. His name is Warner Mendenhall. And after I did that testimony, he saw that clip and apparently said to himself, "Oh my goodness, that is the most perfect cross-examination I've ever seen." And so he reached out to me too, and talked to me for a little bit. And then later that year, when the mandates started for the shots, he reached out to me again and asked me, "Hey, this is crazy. Do you know any attorneys who are in this space taking on cases?" And I'm like, "No, I don't." And I asked him to come on my podcast at the time, and he came on. And right after that, his phone started blowing up. And to his credit, he took that ball and he ran with it. And so now he is deeply involved in pretty much every aspect of COVID litigation. And so from there, in 2023, early 2023, March of 2023, his law firm had they jointly sponsored the first COVID litigation conference in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was an absolute success. I mean, just like everybody else, the attorneys that were missing from the scene, they were isolated and just felt alone and didn't think anybody was out there with them who thought the same way they did. All the big firms totally went in on it and really badly. And so one thing that we found out at that conference is that we had it sold out with 250 people. Over 200 of them were attorneys, and pretty much every single one of them were either solo or small practice attorneys. They do not have the resources. They do not have the backing. They do not have, the institutional knowledge of these larger firms. But they are all incredibly passionate about stepping into this space. They're also, coming from every corner of the law. I mean, we're talking real estate attorneys, we're talking elder law, we're talking litigators, anything, everything. All of these people who are really passionate and are like, we've got to do something. This is wrong. I have a law degree. I can do something. And just like everything else, it was unprecedented. We're looking at things in the law that are totally nonsense. And so how do we figure out how to navigate this wildly new world with all of these wildly bizarre situations and actually help the people who've been harmed and really, really move that needle? And so after that conference, Warner and I co-founded Freedom Council, which is, it's basically a conversation. It is a community of attorneys where we are there to create a space where that conversation can happen, where individuals' experiences can be shared, theories, what cases you are working on, and how to bounce it off other people. Because again, these are isolated people, attorneys all by their lonesome, and suddenly they're finding, oh, there's an entire community. And we're also dealing with issues like the PrEP Act and all of that are really complicated and take a lot of thinking to work our way around. And so that's what that's about. We're also connected very much into victims groups and larger organizations of medical professionals like FLCCC. We're aligned with CHD, Children's Health Defense, and the works, because essentially we are not an organization that has our own attorneys that go out and do cases, but rather we are there to support the work of attorneys in the space, whether they're associated with another organization or whether they're solo. And that's basically where we are. We're also focused on how do you take all of the energy that is out there, outside of the legal world. The work that you've done. I mean, the book you read, I wrote. I'm about halfway through it. I'm making notes. I'm marking pages because a lot of these things are very, very interesting for litigation. And we have doctors who are willing to do litigation. We have scientists who have a lot of really important knowledge, and we also need experts for that litigation. We need economists for a lot of these cases. When you're talking about somebody who's lost their job, you need an economist in some ways to actually be an expert saying, hey, they lost this much amount of money and this is what went on. So we need experts of all varieties. But getting into the legal world is a complicated process. Attorneys are very closed generally. They do live in their own little world, and it doesn't really connect really well to the outside world. What is necessary from other people to help this process? And so that's another place where Freedom Council kind of steps into the gap, where we're working to build up those connections with outside individuals, outside organizations, outside even lay people. For instance, we would definitely like to start organizing FOIA requests, because there's a lot of interesting information that can be gleaned from FOIA requests that can help in litigation. So it's a process. It's a very large process, but I think that mostly covers it there.
So how does it work? Does a lay person come to you and say, I'm in this situation and I need representation? Or is it that you guys go on the offensive and find suits to file?
No, you can't really go out and find suits to file so much. I mean, there are rules with attorneys and how they can get cases.
But I mean, like you could sue like the way you're suing the I guess Department of Health or something like that. I mean, they could be cases like that, presumably.
Yes.
But absolutely. So in other words, if somebody's listening to this now and thinks, I was really, really wronged by whoever, you guys would evaluate that and see if that's something you could help with?
Well, as of this point, I mean, again, we are a very new organization. It is a very complicated system and setup, and we are still working through the process of how to best smooth things over and make those connections. So okay. It is definitely not in its final form. And especially because some of these cases are really complicated when it comes to, and haven't really been figured out, how do we really approach it. For instance, if you have an employment case where you were denied your religious exemption, that is a pretty comfortable situation at this point, although you do run into statute of limitations issues, which is different for every state. And so at this moment in time, essentially, when people do reach out to me, I do post it to the group and just simply say, hey, is there anybody here who can take this on, or what the limitations are, et cetera. It's not in its final form. Let's put it that way. But then there are other issues that are really coming to the fore now with injuries from the injections. That is a much more complicated process because right in the middle of it, you do have the PrEP Act. And the PrEP Act removes liability for any damage caused by the administration of a covered countermeasure, which includes those shots. So we're still trying to work out exactly what ways we can get around those blockages. Some of the ways that we're looking at are workers' comp cases. If a person was mandated by their employer, we're also just feeling it out, just like everybody else. So it's one of those things where I know people are listening and they're going to be like, "Oh my goodness, we've got attorneys who can take these cases." Yes and no. We still need to find our way to that final destination, but that's what we do need help with too.
So if somebody, if a lawyer listening to this thinks I could help with this, or I'd like to be part of this, I assume, since, as you say, it's not in its final form, there's no website yet?
Well, so we do have a very basic minimalistic website. It's freedomcouncil.org with an SEL. And we do have links down at the bottom for attorneys who are interested. There's a simple form to fill out if you're interested. We do have we're actually on a private platform called Circle. It has, I would say it is most like a Facebook kind of setup where you have posts and comments to it. It also has video conferencing and another number of other things. And that's kind of been our repository that we're building up and again, it's in process. We are definitely looking for help building further and financing for building further as well. We also have a link for, I believe it's just for medical professionals right now, but if you are a scientific expert, you can use that same form to fill in your information if you're interested in being a medical expert. We also have a conference that we're doing coming up in Denver, June 8th and 9th of this year. And the real focus of that conference is, practicalities of the litigation in terms of, okay, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what causes of actions have been pursued, what orders have come down, what openings there still are. And also, we do have 2 breakout rooms, and one of those breakout rooms is going to be specifically focused on people who would like to be experts in litigation, whether those are medical experts or scientific experts who are on the stand and are testifying, or people behind the scenes. We do need a lot of records reviewed. We do need people who are willing just to explain the science to us and dig in and do some research to support the theories. So all of those things are part of it. That we want to have people together in the same place, do the opposite of everything that they've done to us this whole time, which is they separate us. We need to come together. We need to talk together, and we need to think out creative ways of how we actually move litigation forward. Because when I look at this whole situation, I do truly believe that litigation is the way that we do this. That's how we change it. It's something that can't really stop us from doing. We can keep grinding away at it. It moves along in the background. It does make some waves, and it also can change the law or interpretation of the law. So it's a lever that we can use to first of all hold the people who did all this accountable for their actions, and second, actually make real sustainable change.
Hey, everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you are getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you are a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. Or what if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking, meeting places getting shut down? Use your website as a lead generation engine. Or what if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO's expert search engine optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. I want to ask you something a little bit off this topic, just because immediately before we started recording this episode, I was just finishing up as a guest on the Buck Johnson show, and he asked me something that I'd like to ask you, which is I guess he took a poll, I guess maybe on Twitter, of his followers, and he asked if you had any friends during this fiasco that you lost, in effect, because they were fanatics on the other side. How many of you have had a friend come back to you and say, look, I was wrong and you were right, and you were getting your information from more reliable sources, and I wish I had listened, and I'm sorry for anything I did to hurt you. What percent of you can say that that's happened to you? And it was about 5% had somebody who'd come back. So 95% of them are sticking with California did better than Florida or something. That's where they still are. So I'm curious, given that you became a bit of a lightning rod over this, I mean, you were well known in Ohio by the dissident voices. You weren't somebody who just quietly objected. You were very much out there. Did you have people who had been previously close to you? I realize it's kind of a personal question, but that the relationship with them became difficult, if not impossible?
Well, I would say that the ones who were close to me are, at this point in time, essentially just not acknowledging the issue at all. So, that it was definitely very antagonistic during the time, and now at this point, it's essentially it didn't happen. In terms of other people, so I was out on Facebook, and I had joined Facebook when it first started, was for college kids. I was exactly the age range that it was for when it all started. But I didn't use social media at all for decades. And so I just had old acquaintances from my school times and from high school and all of that, a lot of academics on there too. And I did get a lot of pushback from a lot of those people at the time. But I mean, they're pretty distant acquaintances. I also had a lot of people who never said anything during that whole time, but after the fact have come back to me and said, thank you so much for what you were posting all that time, because of what you did. I did take the first shot or second shot or whatever, but then I kept reading what you're putting out there, and it stopped me from doing any more. So I would say that the people who were aggressively antagonistic are still not. No, there's no apologies. There's no acknowledgement of what actually happened or any discussion like that. But people who were not aggressively antagonistic have been quietly, saying thank you very much.
Okay, well, that's at least something. So I guess Freedom Council is a big chunk of the answer, but you did have a social media presence during the height of all this, and now that it's more or less subsided and people aren't as focused on it, how has your social media activity changed? Like what kind of things are you talking about these days?
Mostly I'm just pointing out different kind of litigation stuff. I mean, I had the group that I had at the time when we last talked got shut down in the purge of spring of 21, the same purge that took out Andy Slavitt, or not Andy Slavitt, Alex Berenson. I was also, I believe I told you this last time too, that I was very much one of the main subjects in the MIT viral visualizations paper, which was used by the White House to target naughty people like me who were skeptical, but not breaking any rules. So my first group got shut down, and then my second group got shut down, and then my third group got shut down. And so I do have a fourth group, but I haven't used it basically in over a year. I do post some things on my personal page every so often. And also I still have a page that I did a lot of my later podcasts on that's still in existence beyond the data. But in terms of main posts towards the general public, I do on occasion, but not terribly much. I also have a Substack, but I haven't updated that in a very, very long time because, as much as we like to complain about Facebook, it does have its merits. Very specifically, Facebook allows for a conversation, a pretty close to real-time conversation. And so I tend to stick there.
All right. And I want to ask you a question that I implicitly posed to myself in a recent issue of my email newsletter, which is, suppose something like this happened again. Like they say, okay, something else came out of China. Here it comes. How do you think the response among ordinary people would be different this time, if at all?
I think the people who've woken up to it or who had something really awful happen to them are going to fight tooth and nail. They will not stand for it. They will not comply. One of those groups, I think, obviously those who were injured by those shots are very well aware of the lies that they were told, or at least if they've registered that they've been injured, but also the people who trusted the hospital systems and had loved ones killed in the hospital protocols and all of that. That's actually a whole section that's been mostly under the radar, but is truly horrific. It needs to be dealt with. But I think a lot of the people who've really suffered harm would not put up with it. They would fight. A lot of the other ones, I don't know. I mean, the ones like I was talking about, the ones that don't want to acknowledge what happened, I'd like to think that they would also be a little more hesitant, or at least wouldn't be as aggressive to those of us who are speaking out. I mean, I do tend to have a pretty hopeful and positive view of people when they are confronted by something that is clear and they are not in a state of total fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more or less the way I've been thinking, that obviously we now have a sizable minority, let's say, that would just absolutely over my dead body, am I going to let this happen? We definitely got that. It's that, and then because you always have the lackeys who will just do whatever the popular people tell them to do because that's how they've lived their whole lives. Why should they change now? But so the people that are reachable are that middle of the road people who just don't think about stuff like this. They don't think about whose side they're on or what party they should vote for or whatever. Those are they are the big question mark. But the good news, and I do try to find, I don't want people to feel like it's just constantly nothing but misery. The good news is we should remember that the vaccine passport systems that they tried to introduce and temporarily did introduce in a number of cities went away because we, a small minority, nevertheless, we just refused to, okay, so you don't want my business? Then I guess I won't shop there. I guess I won't eat there. I guess I won't take my vacation and spend my money there. It turns out they couldn't work it without us. The merchants couldn't make a profit. People were begging to get those things lifted. So we can still accomplish something even though we don't have the high profile people and the celebrities and the singers. We still are something.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's another part about the litigation that I've been involved with since meeting Warner there, where, these are employment cases a lot, or individual deaths or things like that. There are individuals who have stood up and said no. And that has actually changed things. For instance, one of the cases that he had taken on was Akron Children, or sorry, not Smuckers. Good old Smuckers is here in Ohio, and Smuckers mandated the shot to its salaried employees, and there were some number of those salaried employees who said no. And they fought back with a lawsuit. And originally it was mandated on the salaried employees, and then it was going to be mandated later on the hourly employees. But because of the group of people who said no to Smuckers and sued and lost their jobs, they stopped. They never implemented it on the hourly employees ever, because it wasn't worth it. So when, sometimes it feels like you're you're screaming into the wind there. I mean, it isn't. What we do does make a difference, even if it feels kind of small. What those salaried employees did, they protected a huge number of people from having to face that problem. And we are working to establish this is not okay. I mean, you cannot do this. You cannot break the law in this way. All of these employers clearly were talking out of the same playbook, because they all did the exact same thing. They all treated everybody the same way. They were rather random about it and said, no, we're totally legal here. But when you actually work it out and you fight it, you can establish, no, it wasn't legal. And that same thing goes for these hospitals that got away with, in some cases it was murder. I mean, especially the end of 21, early 22, when there was heavy discrimination against people who didn't take the shot. These stories are horrible, and it's unbelievable what these doctors and hospitals were doing to people. And fighting it is what needs to be done, because if you don't fight it, it's never going to change. And it's a hard thing, but some people are really stepping in and fighting that, and that's very important to do.
Well, no doubt about that. So the website, once again, for those of you interested, Freedom Counsel, COUNSEL, freedomcounsel.org, you say?
.org.
Okay. So we'll have that. And I'll also, I can link to your, to where people can find you, and put that in the video description, also the show notes page, which is tomwoods.com/2475. Well, Kathryn, I'm glad we had a chance to catch up. I'm glad you're still, as I had no reason to doubt, are still out there fighting the good fight. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.